China in the 21st century is a thriving global business hub, a leading player in the global supply chain. The interaction between Chinese businesses and international firms has become a fact of life. However, trade between East and West had existed even before the economic reforms of Deng Xiaoping. One of the major enablers of these international trade was the Comprador class. In this documentary, we attempt to use the institutional framework to analyze the rise, development, and fall of the Comprador bourgeoisie in China. A comprador is the Chinese manager of a foreign firm in China, serving as the middleman in the company's dealings with the Chinese. They were a new business class that emerged in late Qing China. The opening of the trading post after 1842 provided more places and opportunities for the Western and Chinese merchants to pursue their callings. Free trade replaced the monopolistic Chonghong system. However, Western merchants faced various problems. They could not understand the language of the Chinese. The complexity of monetary system, commercial practices, and social customs created strong barriers to smooth trade between Westerners and the Chinese. This created an economic demand for the services of the comprador. The compradors emerged amidst political turmoil. In Marie-Claire Berger's book, The Golden Age of the Chinese Bourgeoisie, she argues that the bourgeoisie owed its growth to the waning of state power at the end of the Qing. It was an opportunist flower which bloomed when the Chinese state was weak. It bloomed in an uncomfortable symbiosis with foreign imperialism. But who were these compradors personally? What was their identity in the society? How did they rise to become the middleman between East and West? Compradors were mostly Chinese men who received Western education, who spoke English and could communicate with both foreigners and China, earning the trust of both sides. For example, Hui Liyuan, a bicultural scholar who collaborated with an English merchant in developing the Ban Island of North Borneo, was educated in Hong Kong and began the study of English in Queen's College. Chen Kunying, a famous comprador and reformer, learned English in Shanghai from his comprador uncle, and John Fryer, one of the most influential missionaries in China.
We will analyze the development of compradors and the impacts on the Chinese society in the political, economic, and social perspective. Politically speaking, the Chinese government relied upon the compradors for foreign affairs since they had the knowledge and experience of working in foreign firms. For example, they were appointed to be the customs, which was responsible for obtaining taxes on export and imports. The importance of compradors for the government can be seen in this quote from a British merchant. There was no ambassador, no custom, no officials, and even the commerce chancellor knew nothing about foreign commerce affairs. Therefore, 3 trusted compradors were appointed. Many compradors also fulfilled many gentleman duties, such as donation and maintaining social order. Also, some compradors left their foreign firms to join local Chinese business, such as 冷水jiu shanggou. Therefore, as opposed to the stereotypical view of compradors as traitors furthering the political and commercial interests of foreign invasion countries, the reality was that many compradors had acted in a patriotic way that were contrary to foreign interest. For example, many compradors contributed towards the Yuanmo Wandong and also acted for the Chinese government as negotiators with foreigners. Due to the compradors' contribution to the Chinese government and also their association with foreign firms, they enjoyed the privilege of freedom from the officials' financial harassment. Such privilege was not enjoyed by traditional merchants. Therefore, compradors had strong political powers which allowed them to do business more successfully. Economically speaking, traditional Chinese discouraged entrepreneurship ideals. Also, economic deficiency in China led to a high interest rate, which made it difficult to start a business. However, by dealing with foreign firms, compradors gathered business knowledge and, most importantly, the capital needed to establish presence in different fields of business, ranging from tea, silk to shipping industry. In the beginning, Compradors served as a general manager in foreign companies overseeing logistics, sourcing, sales, financing due to their relationship and knowledge of the Chinese market and culture. In other words, Compradors facilitated international commerce between Chinese market and the foreign firms. Without the Compradors, it would not be possible for foreign firms to directly do trading in the Chinese market. A Western newspaper editor once written, "The Comprador may be regarded as not only the axle on which the whole wheel of the foreigner's business with the native turns, but in many cases also the hub, the spokes, the rim, and in fact, the whole wheel, save the paint, which may be taken to represent the firm which gives it the color of its name." The Comprador had also accumulated a significant amount of money due to their importance and responsibilities. The Compradors would invest their own capital into various industries. Some of the investments would create wholly Chinese-owned businesses. Occasionally, such investment would take the form of a partnership with the foreign firms that the Compradors used to work for. This is because foreign firms were also in need to diverse their risk and raise capital. Prominent examples of business owned by Compradors are 開平匯礦、輪船招商局、上海機器織布局、the copper mines in Hainan, and other light industries. Without the Comprador's capital, it would not be possible for this early industrialization in China. Such industrialization improved the productivity and efficiency, and also allowed Chinese Compradors to compete against the foreign firms that they used to work for. The competitivity of Compradors can be seen in the following quote from the Harper's New Monthly magazine in 1878. "The Chinese Comprador has learned the lesson which the foreigner has unintentionally taught him, and learned it well. He is improving more than a match for his instructor. In all the Chinese ports, there are Chinese banks, Chinese insurance companies, Chinese boards of trade, Chinese steamship companies, and other concerns, all in Chinese management and supported by Chinese capital. There are Chinese importers and exporters. Unlike foreign firms, Compradors did not have to pay for the expensive local expertise because they were the local expertise themselves. Furthermore, since the Compradors were Chinese, they also received favorable treatment from other Chinese institutions, such as Qinzhang. Therefore, these competitive advantages allowed the Compradors who outperformed the foreign firms. Chinese Compradors were often thought as traitors who sold Chinese economic interests to foreigners. However, the reality was different. Undeniably, the Compradors were helping the foreigners to some extent, but the foreign firms also had a price to pay. The price was excessively high commissions charged by the Chinese Compradors for their local expertise. The commission was so high that it became unattractive for smaller foreign firms to do businesses in China. It was also known that some Compradors made more money than the foreign firm itself. We can see that the Compradors were like tax agency whom drastically reduced the profit that the foreign firms could make in China. However, the Compradors were more constructive than the real tax agency of the government because they actually reinvested this tax or commission back to the economy through industrial investment. Some of these Compradors were Tang Gingxing, Chen Yan. This phenomenon could be illustrated by the following example. If a foreign firm were to make $100 profit, the Compradors would take away $60 for commission and reinvested $40 into various businesses. As we look with hindsight, we now realize that the Compradors had channeled the capital towards the right direction, which was towards the industrialization of China. Socially speaking, Compradors revolutionized the traditional Chinese ideals of career ladders and classes. Merchants were considered as low-class career under the Confucianism. Therefore, many traditional merchants used to encourage their children to study for the imperial examination in order to transcend from being in a despicable merchant class to officials. However, Compradors did not think the same. Under the influence of foreign ideas, many Compradors understood the importance of commercialization and industrialization. They did not agree with Confucianism. Therefore, compradors would send their children to English schools in preparing them for the merchant business. There were also another reason for doing so. The comprador system meant that each comprador were responsible for any affairs and consequences that happened under him. Therefore, compradors would only employ and deal with people that they most trusted. They were their family members. In any case, the compradors would obtain a prestigious title from donating funds to the Chinese government. This in turn improved their social status. Of course, such status were not as well respected as those obtained from imperial examination. However, compradors would try to earn their respect by becoming philanthropists, such as donating to education, health institutes, and disaster relief. The compradors also directly contributed to the society by participating in other activities, such as maintaining social order. We can see that other than earning money from their commercial activities, the compradors also aimed to become a social leader. Furthermore, the development of compradors had widened the definition of merchants from people who just buy and sell to people working in different kinds of business, ranging from industrialists, sourcing to fund provider. As a whole, we can say that the compradors had improved the social standing and the importance of the merchant class.
In the 1900s, there was an apparent decline of the comprador class, and the decline was attributable to many factors, including both the internal and the external. As time went by, foreign businessmen were able to know more about China. In 1867, the British consul mentioned in his report that to deal with the squeezing or blackmail of compradors, learning the Chinese language could be an effective way. He said, for foreign employees, it is of great significance to learn the Chinese language, which conforms to the trend of times and is key to their promotion. Afterwards, in 1915 and 1916, schools for Chinese learning were set up in Shanghai and Hong Kong, respectively. During World War I and World War II, there were some foreign homes that required the employees to learn Chinese and rewarded those who could pass the exams. Those employees were later sent to the mainland to directly deal with the Chinese businessmen. Another external factor was that imports and foreign investments decreased during World War I, which accelerated the decline of compradors. However, the trend of the decline of compradors was actually more attributable to internal factors than external factors. We could then look at the new Chinese socio-economic environment at that time. First of all, Chinese businessmen, as their foreign counterparts, became more experienced in foreign trades. Therefore, they were able to better deal with every detail of transactions. With the increasing of transactions between China and foreign countries, more experience could be gained and networks could be built by both parties, and therefore dependency on compradors gradually decreased. And due to changes in trades and a union of the market, the role of compradors was less important. Moreover, the status of compradors was threatened by the emerging Chinese banks. For example, one of the most important functions of compradors was to act as guarantors for personal business loans. But the banks could turn their personal loans into banks' loans by virtue of their reputation, which mostly nullified the compradors' function as guarantors. Actually, Japanese businessmen were the first to trade without the help of compradors, followed by Western companies. With the expansion of the Sino-Japanese War in late 1930s, the decline of compradors was more obvious. In 1943, China signed new treaties with Western countries, leading to the absolute nullification of old trading. Although the compradors disappeared in the end, their role in history is not to be ignored. They acted as the middleman of not only businesses but also cultures. They were the result of the special situations in China at that time. Studies on the comprador bourgeoisie can actually disclose many aspects of the society at that time, and thus this class is worth more and deeper investigation.